Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share my full review, the digitally digested segment for the Samsung Galaxy Chromebook. At $999 US, this is one of the most expensive Chromebooks on the market, but arguably the best ever put together. Now that doesn't make it perfect. I've already stated that in my unboxing and even in my update, but today is all about the final verdict on whether or not this is a machine you should potentially consider if you're in the market specifically for a high-end Chromebook. So let's get started. $999, we have a 13.3-inch 4K AMOLED display. It's gorgeous, no question about it. Overall build quality on this incredibly light 2.2-pound machine is very good, but not perfect. The hinge for the display wobbles like a mug, and I'm really not a fan of that. I wish it didn't do that. That's something that in this day and age is simply unacceptable. The keyboard is okay, not amazing. You do have a fingerprint scanner right there. You've got a webcam there, a webcam here, an S Pen essentially on the side. They don't call it an S Pen. I'll get to that later. We've got a micro SD card slot on the side that does support UFS 3.0, which is amazing, much like the 4K AMOLED, but I'll get to why it's not amazing, much like the 4K AMOLED. We've got a 10th Gen Core i5 processor powering this experience, 8 gigs of RAM. You cannot modify that, and there's only one configuration, so don't look for 16 gigs of RAM or a Core i7 10th Gen Intel CPU. And we've got a 256 gig NVMe drive, which is fast, arguably faster than probably almost any other Chromebook on the market. So what's not to like? Well, you probably already know battery life, plain and simple, sucks. It is horrible. Right now we've got essentially a full charge, and we're looking at, with brightness all the way up, it's coming up at a little under 3 hours. That is the reported time. Realistically, you'll probably get around 5 hours of battery life out of this machine without keeping the brightness all the way cranked up. And that isn't awful, but it certainly isn't what anyone, at least that I know, who's looking for a Chromebook expects to get out of a Chromebook. In fact, the whole idea is that the OS is light, it's nimble, it's always on, and that kind of surprises me that, you know, Samsung didn't opt to go with something non-Intel, something that obviously would have been ARM-based. That would make more sense. I'm getting an update right now. I would love to tell you that that's going to have an impact on battery life, but I highly doubt it. Now, what is the problem with this besides battery life and, well, that hinge that I told you just wobbles and wobbles and wobbles? The hinge was something that 2 years ago kind of every 2-in-1 suffered from to some degree, but these days that's not the case. In terms of what I made mention before earlier about having an amazing display, having an incredibly fast micro SD card slot reader, those are the type of things that when I look at them, I say this is great on paper, but in terms of practical use of what you can do with this machine, they really equate to nothing. And that's because you cannot stream 4K content on this machine from things like Netflix and other video services. So that means really YouTube and a handful of other things are going to be, let me skip that trial, are going to be your only way to watch and enjoy 4K content. Or of course, if you're viewing your own 4K content, which I've done as well, connecting external storage as well as using that micro SD card slot. So those are good applications, they're good to have. But the reality is that on paper, that UFS standard, which supports micro SD cards that can do essentially 5 times the write speed that we're accustomed to right now with other micro SD cards, like the one I'm holding right here in my hand. Get close on that. That's great, but we don't have a practical application here with this Chromebook. So I say that the screen and the micro SD card slot are indicative of that inability to take amazing hardware and actually put it to use. Because this great screen, yeah, I can watch my videos and see if they're color accurate, but guess what? And that doesn't look color accurate on camera, but I can assure you to my eye, the red is perfectly color accurate. It looks like on my preview monitor that it's skewed to be almost orange. And while we're listening, the speakers are okay. They're not bad. Take a listen. For good reason. I haven't felt that there was a reason to own a Chromebook, at least for me. Now, all of that aside, that's a whole nother thing, which I'm going to get to in a moment, because that ties into what I'm saying about having this amazing hardware. I've never really felt compelled to get a Chromebook because, for me personally, I didn't see practical application, at least compared to a Windows-based machine that suited my needs. And I'll get to a literal Windows machine that suits my needs, as well as an Android-driven tablet that suits my needs, that draws a like comparison to this. So what I'm getting at here is that you can watch 4K content, but because you cannot use Netflix, because you cannot use such a wide variety of services and actually enjoy 4K content on here, it leaves me to question why you would actually want this 4K display. And that's coming from someone who is absolutely addicted to OLED displays and UHD resolution. So if I'm having a hard time justifying this display because of its usability constraints, again, the color accuracy, the vibrancy, and the contrast are amazing, but if I can't video edit on Chrome OS, which at least right now you still can't, what the hell is this worth? I mean, it's just not, it's eye candy, it's beautiful, but you cannot really use or do anything tangible other than watch YouTube videos in 4K, and they'll look great. You can also, of course, watch your own content. As I mentioned, anything that I'm, pulling right now from, I'll pull up 4K HDR, even though it's not going to do that. I think the screen, by the way, in terms of brightness, you're looking at 400 to 500 nits. I'll use the LG standard. And that's a whole nother thing, is that it has so much going for it, but then the OS is such a limitation. And the display is really the first casualty of that. So while everybody talks about the battery life, I think that's because from a core functionality, that's a big drawback to get 3 to 5 hours of battery life, depending on brightness and what you're doing. But to me, it's really a bigger problem to have an amazing display you can't do anything with. It's a bigger problem to have a UHS 3 supported SD card slot that you can't do anything with. So these are great things on paper that amount to unheard of specifications, not completely unheard of, but you know what I'm saying. But at the end of the day, that's all they are. It's like vaporware in a sense, even though it's sitting in front of me. And build quality is very good despite the wobbly hinge. The keyboard I mentioned, it could be better. I don't really love it. Key travel isn't quite where I'd like it to be. Trackpad is perfectly competent. The webcams are both good. The pen input is surprisingly good. But again, how many applications are you going to be able to utilize it? I mean, and this is coming back to Chrome. I mean, this all comes back to Chrome OS, because I know Samsung, a lot of you like to make comments that this will be launching in the States at some point as the Flex with Windows 10, and that's great. But if it suffers from similar battery life, you can throw that in the garbage too. And by the way, I sound negative. I'm not really being negative. This is just the truth of the machine. If you love the build, if you love the screen, I love all of those things. And you absolutely have to have a Chromebook. You're not going to find a better one if you're willing to accept the wobbly display and the terrible battery life. You just won't, because you aren't going to find one with a 10th gen Intel i5 processor, and it's a U-series processor, so you're not going down the road of such low voltage that it's completely thwarted from behaving in a snappy fashion. You are getting a true 256 gig NVMe drive that can legitimately throw out read and write speeds like any of the computing comparisons you'd make with Intel or, of course, Mac machines. So that's a big plus. RAM is current. Everything on here is current. So Samsung didn't cut corners. The problem, again, boils down to Chrome OS. And this brings me back to what you heard me mentioning before, that I have not myself ever really been driven to want Chrome OS, and now you know why. Because you could have all of these amazing specifications, and you really can't take advantage of them. So, if this machine had a 1080p display, Would it be a better option? Absolutely. Because, of course, we would be getting better battery life. But a lot of people have said to me, is it just the display? And, well, I don't know, because I don't know how optimized Chrome is to handle battery management with this. I won't pretend to know. And in addition to that, the battery is very small on this machine. So I'm not sure that I can absolutely tell you that it's impacted by having a UHD display, but the battery size is so small that I don't think it would have amazing battery life even with a 1080p display. Now, I could be wrong, and if I am, so be it, but that model doesn't exist. And as I said earlier, when this does eventually make its way to the States as a Windows-based machine, if it suffers from the same abysmal battery life, they're going to have a very hard time selling it. It's just a fact of life. And while there are many of you out there that will insist you do not need the battery life, you have no problem plugging it in, and I get that completely. I used to live by that standard. We've come to a time, even with Windows 10 machines, where that's no longer an issue. You're not going to find a brand new Ultrabook with this sort of battery life. In fact, my daily driver, the HP Spectre X360 13T, which has an Intel 10th Gen i7 CPU, it also has a 2 terabyte NVMe. Granted, it's a much more expensive machine than this, but if you strip that down and get the base model with 1080p, or even forget that, get the one that I first got from Best Buy, which I think is on sale for $14.99 now, has, so $500 more gets you better battery life, the same exact panel, that's a Super AMOLED being used here, of course, in UHD res. You still have pen input. You don't have a built-in pen like this does. You don't have 2 webcams, but you will have functionality that you just don't with this machine. So I feel like this offers Chrome OS all of the abundance of tech innovation that we have in the computing world, but Chrome OS simply doesn't have the ability to take advantage of whether it's that UHS 3 support here on the side, which I love as a photographer. I would love to go out and grab a UHS 3 card and throw it in here and have 500 meg read, and write speeds, somewhere in that vicinity at least. It's not going to be constant, but it's a big jump from 90, isn't it? And yeah, you can buy full-size SD cards that do 200 to 300, again, not constant, but not that fast. So having that on here, it's just like you could drool, and then when you find out what are you going to do with it, you're not going to do much. And the same applies to the S Pen. And I'll keep calling it an S Pen because that's exactly what it is. This is a great little pen. If you're a Galaxy user, you already probably know it, love it. It's not exactly the same, but the form and function overall is. The latency on screen is really very good. And for creating notes, it does a fantastic job. But at the end of the day, no matter how good that latency is, no matter how good the pressure sensitivity is, it's a note-taking machine. And that is, again, a result of Chrome OS. And you can see the screen wobbling, or at least you should be able to. And this is a huge turnoff for me personally. So that's more of a personal thing. Everything I've mentioned so far, I don't consider personal preference. I consider it a baseline standard for computing. And that doesn't matter whether you're running Windows, Mac, or, of course, Chrome OS. This is all about functionality, capability, and having all of these bells and whistles amount to things you can't really use is a big problem. So a lot of people look at this and say, wow, it's just so expensive, $1,000. But I look at that 4K AMOLED and I say, find another machine that's got a 13.3-inch 4K AMOLED for $1,000 and that has a true 256 gig NVMe and legitimate 8 gigs of RAM and a legitimate 10th gen i5 Intel CPU. And guess what? You won't find one. Problem is this doesn't run Windows, does it? So you can't take advantage of these things. What it does amount to, though, inside of the Chrome OS experience is flawless performance inside of Chrome OS. But that's because Chrome OS simply does not need all of this horsepower. And now we come full circle to why this machine doesn't make a hell of a lot of sense. Because having all of these things is great, and it does make Chrome OS run flawlessly, but at the end of the day, you can't do more with them. You can't use them to their full potential. So whether I'm talking about the display, which I know I've gone over and over again, that It's beautiful. You're going to love looking at it. You're going to love browsing the web. You're going to love watching YouTube 4K content on it. You're going to love reviewing any 4K content you've captured on your phone or on a real camera using the micro SD card slot or one of its Type-C ports. But that's the end of the story. Whereas if you had a real computer, obviously you could do much more with that 4K panel and its color accuracy, such as video editing, photo editing. It's just we can't leverage those things properly inside of Chrome OS. And I'm the last person that will purport to be a Chrome OS specialist. I'm not. So anyone watching this review should be working from that perspective. I'm not the Chrome OS guy, but I am the logical guy. And it's completely illogical to convince yourself that you need these specifications on a platform where you can't utilize them. So, with all that said, is this still the best Chromebook that money can buy? Absolutely. Because again, the only flaws it really has are the wobbly hinge, which makes me a little crazy, and the bad battery life. And a lot of you are willing to look past both of those. And if you are, buy it, because it is worth the money in that sense. As I stated, you will not find a machine this lightweight, this powerful, running Chrome OS for $1,000. It's just not possible. It isn't. And it gets a little bit warm, but big deal. The two-in-one capability is very good. It's about as good as it could ever be in terms of tablet mode, because this thing is just a hair over 2 pounds. So lightweight, it absolutely is. It doesn't come completely flush here, but that's pretty common. A lot of you want to know, can I open this with one hand? The answer is yes, you can. Don't know why that's such a game changer for so many, but yes, you can do that. Let's go over the ports. Headphone jack, Type-C, volume rocker, and on the other side, as I mentioned before, we have the S Pen. That's the Bay. The S Pen, I'm going to keep calling it an S Pen, is right here. Another Type-C port, power button, and that micro SD card slot reader that, again, it can read the fastest micro SD cards on earth. But why the hell would you need them inside of Chrome OS? And that really says it all. Kind of the same reason as why would you need a 4K OLED on a platform where you can't leverage it properly at all. So there will be plenty of you out there who will say, this guy doesn't even really like Chrome OS. That's not true. I think it has a place. I think it has a function. It serves a legitimate purpose. The market has proven that because they're still being made. But here's where I start to compare and say, if you're drawn to this because you love Chrome OS, I already answered that question. If you can live with the battery life and the wobbly screen, you will not find a better machine. That rhymed. That was not intentional, I promise. None of this is scripted. I write no copy. Maybe that'll change someday. I doubt it. But let's get into comparisons. So, for example, I mentioned before that I would have liked to have seen this running on, rather than Intel, and I love Intel. Props to Intel. Intel is a great company. I know a lot of you prefer AMD. This isn't a flame war now between the two. I would have rather seen an ARM-based CPU here. Maybe battery life would have been better, and we certainly don't need all of the horsepower that 10th gen i5 is giving us. I mean, it makes this thing totally flawless, just as it should be for $1,000, but we're at a point where ARM CPUs can deliver what this Core i5 does. And so I make the case, something like the Tab S6 that I have right here, which I do use every day. I love this tablet. I think it's the best Android tablet on the market. You have your S Pen back there. You can buy this very inexpensively these days, compared to this, half the price of this. Even if you get the one I have that has the 8 gigs of RAM and 256 gigs of storage, I think that's a more compelling device than this Galaxy Chromebook. Yes, it doesn't run Chrome OS. It runs, just the base, Android OS. But in terms of what you can get done, all the same stuff, essentially. And battery life is better. And, Samsung does make a keyboard case combo, which I covered, and it's horrible, but still, if you absolutely had to have it, you could. And there are third-party ones you could pick up. And I would much more quickly advise someone to pick up that tablet that I just brought on screen for a second than buy this. This just doesn't make sense. It takes up more room, it's heavier, and at the end of the day, even though it has a larger screen with higher res, and Samsung, if you're listening, make a Galaxy Tab that's 13 inches already. What are you waiting for? You did it years ago. In 2014, we had the 12.2 Note. Bring it back. Give us a 14-inch Note. And by the way, if they would have made the screen bigger on this, I think that's also a winner. The Flex in Korea, South Korea, to be clear, they do make larger displays on the Flex lineup. So hopefully that all makes its way here. But for now, it's vaporware, at least in the US. So again, the tablet to me makes so much more sense. And I can't make that argument for iOS-based products, but I'm sure many of you will. And there we go again. So eliminating this. Now, if you said to me, okay, recommend a Windows machine. So I grab from my left my daily driver, which is that 13T, the Spectre. And yes, this machine retails for over $2,000 because of what I've got going on inside. But you don't have to get the AMOLED version. You do not have to get the 2 terabyte NVMe. You can get the one at Best Buy that's just the same i5 that's in here, 10th gen i5, a full HD display. It is a touchscreen. It is a 2-in-1 convertible. There is nowhere to dock a pen, but you are going to have a micro SD card slot reader right there. It's not going to read the UFS fastest micro SD cards on earth, but if it did, it could use them at least. It has a legitimate kill switch for the camera. It has Windows Hello facial recognition, which I love. That doesn't exist, of course, here in Chrome OS. It has Thunderbolt 3 ports, which put it on a whole nother level. Battery life is literally 2 hours longer on this machine. And I mean, I can't make any argument for not picking up that Core i5 model of the Spectre 13T. I mean, unless you absolutely just hate, you want to destroy, murder Windows 10, and some of you do, and I understand why. It's also far from perfect. But from a functionality standpoint, if you pick up that one from Best Buy or from HP Direct, again, the Core i5, 8 gigs of RAM, and I think it has a 256 gig NVMe drive. Very comparable to what's going on in here, different operating system, but many more bells and whistles with the Spectre, and that's $1,000 on sale routinely. I think the retail is $1,299. But even if you wanted to step up to the one at Best Buy, the pre-config with the OLED 4K option so that you have a like display comparison. By the way, Samsung makes the OLED that's in the Spectre. It's their panel. Don't ask me why Samsung opted to let other companies do it first, but they did. They didn't want to take the risk, I guess. After all, they are a tremendous hardware manufacturer, and they fulfill those channels for so many companies. Go back to the Apple days, right? But the whole point is that you can get all of those bells and whistles in the HP machine, and that's, I think, on sale right now for $14.99. So if you were looking at this, I would tell you, grab the HP for the extra $500. You're already spending $1,000. Get a machine that can really be a machine. Because at the end of the day, Chrome OS, I feel like, is supposed to be light. Check, this is light. It's supposed to be functional. This is functional. But it's also supposed to be always on. And part of being always on is battery life. And so I know I'm coming back to this, and I know a lot of you have already decided, sexy, love this thing, don't care about the battery life. I can plug it in, right? I mean, it charges from Type-C, comes with a tiny little power brick like a phone would use. Who cares? But it's just not part of the expectation of Chrome OS for me, and I think for the majority of Chrome OS shoppers, even though I'm not one of them. Feel free to chime in the comments and disagree. I'm always up for a good debate. Maybe some live streams soon, since most of us are or should be self-quarantining. Let's get through this pandemic, shall we? So really, it just amounts to that I can't recommend this when I know you can pick this up, again, with nearly the same specs, but the capability that this machine lacks in every facet. And for those of you who think this video is too long, well, there are 5-minute videos you can find, I'm sure, or 15-minute videos. And they may or may not touch on all of the things that I'm talking about. They may give you some flashy graphics and, splash screens and slider shots, and eventually I might do that. But right now, this is just a no bullshit, as usual, straight review of a machine that I thought was incredibly compelling. It's really nice, but I've already said it. Even when they come out with the Flex here in the US, if battery life is anything like this, it's going to be a hard pass, because we already have Ultrabooks that are only slightly heavier. That's the other thing I didn't mention. With the HP, we're talking about nearly 2 3/4 pounds, whereas with this, it's 2 1/4 pounds with the Samsung Galaxy Chromebook. So why on earth, for that weight difference, and remember this charges with Type-C also, and yes, this is thicker, it's not 9 mm thin like this, but I also have to say, as good as the build quality is on the Sammy, it's a little fragile. It's not a critique, but I feel like I could just snap the display in half because it's so thin. And I'm not saying that this isn't where things are going. I believe this is, as far as design goes, exactly where things are going. But I live in today's world, and in today's world, $1,000 on the 13T is $1,000 well spent compared to $1,000 spent on this Chromebook. And I know they're apples to oranges. Look, I even brought in this for a reason, because I wanted you to have another reference point, because I actually think this is a better thing to buy, that being the Tab S6. You're still getting an AMOLED display, not as high res, but close. You're actually getting better cameras on this in this pandemic age we live in of video conferencing for work and with family members. You're getting, in my opinion, a better pen. So there are a lot of things going for it. And in my opinion, again, there are just better options in every form and fashion than this Chromebook. But, and I should have said it at the top, and if I did, I forgot already, this is the best Chromebook ever made. It just, at the end of the day, doesn't make sense, because it has all of these things that inside Chrome OS are essentially locked up in a jail that one day might be able to work. But if you think you're going to own this long enough to see UHS micro SD cards affordable and a standard, you're not. This thing's going to be something you give to your kids or to your grandparent, or you see where I'm going with this? It's going to be so old at that point that even though it has the UHD display and the solid 10th gen processor, all the bells and whistles that most Chromebooks just usually, they eat the poo-poo. They've got garbage internals, and that's what makes them affordable. Yeah, they may not be as fast as this, but they're not trying to future-proof because they know that the future of Chrome OS is still a question mark. And this is not a dig against Chrome OS. It's more of Samsung seems to have lost their way on understanding how they could really flex the operating system. And I think all they really did was they made a new line of laptops, this exact design, everything, and they figured, why not make it a Chromebook and a Windows machine? Which isn't a bad idea if both operating systems can properly leverage the hardware. And as you know, one can and one cannot. And that rounds things out. So horrible battery life, great build quality, floppy screen, amazing screen quality that you will not be able to use to its full potential because of Chrome OS just not giving you a range of things to do other than just consume content, which even there you're crippled. Good keyboard, okay speakers, great pen input, and the only other thing I didn't mention is charge time is fairly quick. But considering how bad battery life is that really a major benefit? No, especially when Ultrabooks have very similar, if not identical, charge time and longer run time because they're actually putting large enough batteries on board. And if it's got to be, a quarter or a half a pound heavier, Samsung, make this a quarter or a half a pound heavier, because had they actually put a larger battery in here, my only critique would be what I've mentioned about, not being able to leverage the amazing read capability of the micro SD card slot reader, the floppy screen, and that's it. And of course, not being able to really leverage the OLED, but that I would still always have an OLED. I don't want anyone to be confused. I will never not want an OLED until we somehow develop something that makes OLEDs look like LCDs. We're not there yet. And for those of you that are wondering about grid, the touchscreen grid pattern, it's here. A lot of people complained about the grid pattern on the HP, and it's here too. So if you were bothered by seeing the digitizer on the HP, you'll be bothered by seeing it here as well. It's not the exact same application because they're different manufacturers, HP versus Samsung, but because the OLED is the same and because they are both 2-in-1s, it's just the way things happen to be in this case. So overall, best Chromebook ever made, but as I've said time and time again, your money can be better spent unless you absolutely must have a Chromebook. And if that's the case, then you should absolutely run out and buy this. If you are on the fence and you're not sure, run from this thing. Run from it. Because $1,000 is much better spent on any other Windows 10 Ultrabook right now with the current crop of Intel CPUs. And AMD's got some hotness on the way too. So I'm not forgetting about them, don't worry. Not a fanboy, not forgetting about anybody. Improvements in tech are improvements. But that rounds it out. Nice machine, just not a good way to go, especially if you care about what's happening down the road. And that's not to say that Chrome OS won't eventually have, the ability to video edit. I mean, that is the goal, but it doesn't have it right now. And the UHS 3 is a waste. It wouldn't be a waste over here, HP. HP, give me that UHF 3. Give me that. But also, still way ahead because those cards, availability, cost, they're not manageable at this point. Getting something that's 5 years away in the future now is just a talking point. It's as I said, kind of like vaporware, even though it's tangible. That rounds it out. Hope you enjoyed the review. Didn't plan to go 30 minutes, but this was a struggle for me personally because I really like this machine a lot. I just find myself scratching my head as to who it's for, since I do think most Chrome OS users would love to have this, but not at the expense of it, not being the always-on identity that Chrome OS represents. But it is fast, it is light, and it's good at everything it can do. It's just that it can't live up to the potential of its own hardware because of the limitations of Chrome OS. It's not something you'll find with a Windows machine, but you'll find plenty of other bugs, bugaboos, and crap that could turn you off, which is why Chrome OS is still a success and is still being made, to be clear. And if you made it this far, hopefully now you know this was about as balanced as things get. Any questions or comments, please feel free to post them. Hit that like button. Oh, and by the way, gaming, you're not going to do well on this either. Some of you had asked questions about what games can run on this. Forget it. That's another thing. Even with this machine that has no dedicated GPU, but at least has Iris Plus graphics, you can game. Here, forget about gaming. And I'm not saying Chrome OS users are looking to game, but some of you are. So forget it. It's just not going to happen. Any questions or comments? I'm not saying you can't play anything. You can. You're just not going to play a wide variety of games. It's all Chrome OS, man, and women. Any questions or comments, please feel free to post them. Hit that like button. And as usual, please feel free to subscribe. Stay safe. Later.